everyone. My name is Laura, and yes, I am Dad Espy. And today's topic is going to be covering masking. I'm going to try to keep this relatively simple, and honestly, pretty much everything I'm going to be saying in this video is coming from my own personal perspective on masking and how it affects my life and all that. And I can't speak for other people's experiences, I can only speak for my own. It's very possible that there are people that are watching this, or maybe people watching this know someone who can relate to this in some ways. Their experience may not be the exact same as mine, but there may be a few common factors that could come into play. It's just like the way it manifests is a little bit different. Either way, I hope you find this incredibly helpful, and let's get to it. So the first thing to talk about when it comes to masking is what it even means. Masking is a term that we in the autistic community use to basically say we're blending in with the rest of the world. The way I think of it is like we metaphorically put on different masks in front of like different people. Like a lot of people kind of do that anyway. Like we show different versions of ourselves in front of other people, or different aspects of our personalities to other people. When it comes to people on the autism spectrum, that could also mean mimicking neurotypical behaviors. Some of those might include eye contact for longer periods of time, whether it be forced or otherwise. Sometimes finding little tricks to make it look like we're maintaining eye contact for a good period of time. Less stimming, at least the stimming that's very obvious. Basically, we are doing what we can to fit into that, what people expect of us, I guess, when conversing with us. Especially in the more mild parts of the spectrum, it's basically we're passing as neurotypical. And in case you don't know what I mean by neurotypical, I basically mean non-autistic folks. It's like their neurology is in typical or average fashion, more or less. And that's not assuming that there are other mental health issues along with that. That's when you get into neurodiversity, which is a fun, complicated topic, but also very fascinating. For me personally, that could be that I'm trying to do what I can to maintain eye contact by finding a point of focus to talk to. Sometimes what I do, especially like in entertainment, I try, especially if I need to look more intimidating, I try to look anywhere in this part of the face. I try to hold it there for longer periods of time, basically giving myself a point of focus, and that way it keeps my eyes from shifting all over the damn place. And if I'm looking at like this part of the face-ish, like here, it kind of looks like I'm giving you eye contact when I might not actually be giving you the eye contact that would normally happen within a conversation. I learned that from a body language book, and I learned that this is a very social area, but here is like the power zone, and that's like great for if you want to be more intimidating and look like you're staring into someone's soul. But I would only do that in like haunted house stuff, and if I actually was trying to be intimidating. I mean, I could also just T-pose to assert dominance, but also, I'm small. Another thing you might notice is that there's more subtle stims that people might do with their hands, so sometimes like if I start pressing into my palms, that could be it. Sometimes like just tapping like drums, that could be it, but it's a more socially acceptable stim. Essentially, when I'm masking, I'm finding the more socially acceptable stims, or anything that, may not look like a stim at first, but it could be a stim, but it's not very noticeable. I kind of feel like a chameleon or a ninja navigating the social world whenever I'm, like, not being my full self. Some people are able to mask for longer periods of time than others. Some may not be able to mask for a very long period of time, or it's maybe harder for them to mask. It all depends on the individual person. I found that I could theoretically do it, and maybe I've subconsciously been masking like a massive portion of my life. I do remember feeling that a lot of the behaviors I was doing, and also being hyper aware of what I was doing, I remember doing that a lot growing up, because I always wondered, like, what people would think when they look at me. Like, just what about me would make them notice that I was the weird kid. And one reason why we would do that is to fit in, or, like, if you're a kid, you want to make friends. You want to, like, play with and interact with other people sometimes. But when those people don't know how to interact with you when you're being yourself, then they get weirded out, and they suddenly are just like, huh? How do I deal with this? And, like, maybe not even want to interact with you. They just don't want to take the time to understand you, and that sucks. Another reason why we might mask, especially when we're adults, is that disability discrimination is a thing, particularly in the workforce. So, for me, I've definitely masked during interviews and at work to kind of like, well, hide the fact that I was autistic because, frankly, if I could get away with passing as a neurotypical person, then it was more likely that they would not make assumptions about me that would be probably wrong, and also have preconceived notions about what autism is, and then base that into how they would perceive me without taking the time to get to know me first as a coworker and as a person, or as an employee and a person, but whichever. And usually I would want people to get to know me first as, like, me before knowing that I'm autistic. And sometimes that means masking. Honestly, I don't like that I have to do it. I rather would just be myself. And for the most part, I try to be myself in front of other people. But I may not, like, be super stimmy or anything. Like, when I'm at home, that's when I can kind of relax. Or if I'm in communities that are with other autistic folks, I can kind of relax a little bit. I'm still trying to break that habit of being very hyper aware of what I'm doing. Like, when I don't have to be hyper aware of what I'm doing, because I'm used to feeling that, like, fucking constantly. And that can go into some of the consequences of masking for too long. One of the reasons why people stim, and I'm going to cover more of that in a later video, is to kind of like release some of the energy that we feel, because there's a lot of things that we're processing at once, whether we want to or not. And stimming and other things that we do are ways to kind of lower the pressure of it so much. Because if we just keep letting that build up and build up and build up and build up, eventually we're going to crack. And that's when meltdowns start to happen. Meltdowns are not fun, and neither is sensory overload. So when we mask for too long, you can use a meltdown as a sign that we have been doing that, or there's just like way too much happening. Like when there's all of that happening to the point where it's overwhelming, we can't mask anymore. It kind of just forces our hand. And what that might look like if we don't have a meltdown when we get home, we'll probably end up feeling very exhausted. If not physically, at least mentally. And possibly emotionally, but that also depends. I know that if I have a long period of socializing with people, as much as I do like socializing with people, and I do like entertaining people, I need at least a little bit of time to kind of wind down and transition to another point, because wearing that mask for so long, I gotta take it off eventually. And that goes for everybody who is on the autism spectrum. Like, eventually the mask has to come off, or at least a little bit. So when we have spaces that allow us to be ourselves and we don't have to wear those masks, we are not kind of inadvertently forced into it. Well, whether it's intentional or not, that's the question, but that depends on society. It feels really good to not have to hide ourselves. It's good to be ourselves. Obviously, we'll still be conscious of, like, just being a respectful person like anybody else. But we don't have to hide when we, like, flap our hands, or we don't have to ride rocking, or, like, just, like, tapping and everything like that. We don't have to hide it, and we don't have to explain ourselves, and it's really nice to have that. And when you spend a lot of time masking without realizing that you do, as I've learned, there's a lot of anxiety and mayhaps depression that can come with that because of, like, all that nonsense of not having the time and resources to understand it because no one bothered to say anything about it, and I didn't know better at the time. In my personal case, there were people who knew and just didn't tell me, but in other people's cases, it's just that they didn't know. Like, they genuinely tried to look into it, and they just literally didn't know. And neither did anybody else they were with. They just didn't catch it. I imagine for them that would be extremely frustrating. And it's like, having all that time of knowing that there's something, I can kind of relate to knowing that something is off and then getting an answer to it. I know from the perspective of someone who has had people in my life who had that answer the whole time and didn't bother to tell me, versus someone who didn't have that answer and it wasn't known before. That's a different thing. But regardless, masking for a very long period of time is very frustrating, and it's also, like, I feel like it's a little demeaning to your sense of self because you don't really understand yourself. And if you don't understand yourself, it's really hard to, like, develop as a person into your own personality because you just don't know that part of yourself, or you don't know, like, you don't trust anything that you may or may not know about yourself. And I can tell you, that feeling sucks. And one of the ways that we don't have to mask so much is just more understanding from the general public of what autism is, how it may manifest itself, and also just like being understanding of us as people. I know that we're complicated, but also people in general are complicated. We're complex beings. But if you can even make a little bit of effort to better understand how we function, that would be really nice. And that would be, a nice thing to know that maybe you're someone who I don't have to fully mask myself around. And it's like, okay. I try not to mask too much when I do like streaming and like content like this and all that, but even then I also understand that in the visual industry, impressions matter and stuff like that. And I also understand that, people will develop their assumptions based on what they see at first and yada yada yada. It would help to take a second to see if those assumptions are correct, or at least take some time to get to know the person a little bit. Yeah, first impressions are a thing, but they're not always right. And preconceived notions are also not always right. Now, personally, I'm someone who likes flipping preconceived notions on their head because, in some ways, it can be entertaining. Done respectfully and tastefully, of course. But that's just me as an entertainer. As a person, it's also kind of fun. Again, as long as it's respectful and tasteful. But it would be nice if we didn't have to mask so much, and I know that at times we may seem like a lot to handle, but we're just trying our best. Like, we're trying really hard, probably, with, like, just functioning in this world that is not designed for us. So cut us a little bit of slack, and give us, like, some times where we don't have to mask so much. That would be really nice. I know I'm probably rambling, and I may or may not have repeated myself a bit because sometimes I forget what I said, and I'm just like, wait, hold on a second. But I hope this was very helpful to you, and I hope that this gives you a better understanding of masking. It may not be like a very informative, but it's like, at least like in a clinical sense, but like in a perspective. I don't know if what I said makes sense. I hope it does. It definitely made sense in my head. I just hope that it translated well enough that it's in a format that is good. And if you want to see more videos like this, feel free to hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, because that will let you know when I post new stuff. And if you want to support me in other ways, check the description below. I have other things there that you are very welcome to check out to follow along in this wondrous adventure. But thank you so much for sticking around, and until next time, take care.